Underscore. She woke up in a hospital bed with her wrists bruised, her voice missing, and a name no one remembered. Naomi Winters was never supposed to survive. But what she uncovered, beneath the ice, beneath the lies, would shake the nation and melt. The silence that kept thousands like her invisible. If you believe in stories that uncover truth, expose injustice, and remind us of the power of love in the darkest places, this one's for you. Subscribe now to our channel, because here, forgotten voices are not just heard, they echo. Underscore. The cold didn't bother Horace anymore. It hadn't. In years, he'd grown used to sleeping near vents and behind dumpsters, in alleys that still reeked of piss and fried grease from the bar crowd the night before. The cold, at least, was honest. It didn't pretend to care, didn't give him false hope like the blank stares of people passing by, pretending not to see him in the mud he used to have blaze. God, he missed that dog. The lake was still. This morning, Blackridge Lake always was. The locals called it God's silence, but Horace knew better. It wasn't God keeping still, it was everything people wanted buried staying where it sank. He shuffled closer to the edge, worn boots crunching through the frostbitten reeds. Every step crackled like dry bones underfoot. The air was sharp enough to slice through his beard. His fingers ached inside the mittens he'd stitched from an old wool sweater. He had no reason to walk this way today. No one was handing out coffee. The food pantry wasn't open till noon. But something tugged at him, and then he heard it. Not a scream, not a call. Just a sound too out of place to ignore. He froze. It came again, tap, 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 like fingers. Not hard, not urgent, but steady. Like someone running out of strength and trying to remember how to ask for help. He squinted out over the ice. It stretched flat and thick, a pale blue sheet under a bleached sky. A few yards ahead, something shimmered oddly. He stepped forward, slower now, heart thudding like war drums, and then he saw it, shape under the ice. He dropped to his knees so fast he scraped them bloody. His breath fogged over the glassy surface. Just beneath, too still to be a fish, too human to dismiss, was a face. A girl. Young. 10, maybe 11. Dark curls spread around her like ink and water. One hand pressed against the ice, palm flat. Her eyes were closed, lips parted just enough to show the smallest sign of life or death. No, Horace whispered, his voice hoarse from years of yelling at no one. No, not like this. Not like this, baby girl. He yanked off a boot and slammed it against the ice. Once, twice. His arms were trembling. Not from cold, he didn't feel cold anymore, but from fury. Fury at a world where little girls ended up beneath lakes, and men like him were left to find them. The ice cracked. A spider web of white fractured outward from the point of impact. He didn't stop. Another blow, and then it broke. Freezing water surged upward, soaking his chest, biting at his skin. He plunged both arms in, grabbed what he could, her coat, her shoulder, a fistful of curls, and pulled with everything left. In him, she came up like a ghost, pale and limp, water streaming off her body like grief. Her skin was cold, impossibly cold, but her chest, he swore, moved. Horace collapsed onto the shore with her in his arms. He held her like he used to hold Blaze after a thunderstorm, whispering nonsense to keep him calm. You hold on, you hear? Me, he rasped. You hold on, little one, I got you. And somewhere between the wind and the silence and the crunch of snow under someone's boot sirens, began to scream at Red Hollow Clinic. People weren't used to emergencies. Most came in for sinus infections, sprained ankles, a bad cough that turned worse. When Deputy Boone stormed in with a soaking wet homeless man cradling a child, everything stopped. She was under the lake. Boone shouted, found her under the ice, she's breathing. Nurses sprang into action. Gurneys, 4 lines, warmers, questions flying in the air, unanswered. Horace stood frozen in the waiting room, dripping and shaking, and ignored the way he always was. Except now, his arms were empty. In the corner, Elijah Dean paused his mop mid-swipe. He wasn't supposed to look, wasn't supposed to speak. That's what they told him when he got the job. Keep your head down, be grateful, and stay out of the way. But he looked and saw her, lying on the gurney, eyes shut tight. Skin the color of tea with too much milk. Her lips were still a terrible shade of blue. He didn't move for several seconds. Then the head nurse barked, "Dean, back to the janitor's closet. You don't belong in trauma." He did as he was told. But inside, something refused to settle. Can almost forget you're poor in Red Hollow until someone reminds you. Elijah had grown up being reminded. At school, in grocery store lines, when he'd walk his little sister to the library and people crossed the street. He was 17 now, tall, sharp-eyed, quiet. People said he was respectful, which often just meant he never argued. His mom worked nights at the laundry plant and days cleaning the courthouse. Still, they barely kept the heat on. This job at the clinic 3 hours after school, weekends when they called him in, meant everything. That girl under the ice ... She didn't look scared. She didn't even look alive, and yet something about her, something pulled at him. Maybe it was because she looked like someone he might have grown up with. Maybe it was because nobody else seemed to care that a girl had nearly died right outside their perfect white fence town. The next day, he brought an extra muffin from home. It wasn't much, just the broken half of a lemon poppy seed his mom couldn't sell at market. He slipped into her room during his cleaning rounds. She lay there, connected to monitors, lips less blue now, skin slowly warming. He placed the muffin on the side table. "In case you wake up hungry," he whispered. Then he left, just as quietly as he'd come. Elijah kept checking the room every shift after that. He didn't say anything. Didn't do much. Just stood there for a second longer than necessary, emptying trash bins, pretending to rearrange medical gloves, anything to justify the extra seconds near her bed. She hadn't moved, not even a twitch. But every day, she looked a little less like someone frozen in time, and more like a person trying to find her way back into it. The nurses called her Jane Ice. The cops, the lake girl, the front desk, that poor thing. But Elijah didn't use any of those names. In his head, he called her Snow. Not because she was cold, God, she was, but because she looked like she didn't belong in this season. Like someone had dropped her into winter by accident. Like she came from someplace softer, someplace warmer. He started bringing more muffins. Not every day, not enough to get noticed, but often enough that her side table began to look like a quiet little altar offerings to a girl who hadn't asked for anything. And then, one Tuesday afternoon, as he was wiping the window ledge, she blinked. Just once. His heart nearly stopped. He stood frozen, rag in hand, unsure if he'd imagined it. Then her lips parted, dry, cracked. A sound came out. Barely a whisper. "Thirsty." Elijah dropped the rag. It landed with a wet splat on the floor. He grabbed the water cup on the tray, hands shaking so hard he almost spilled it. He held the straw to her lips, watched her sip. She only took one mouthful, but it was enough to prove something huge. She was back. "I'll tell the nurse," he said, breathless. But before he could move, she lifted her hand, just barely, and touched his wrist. "Don't." Her voice was rough, raw, unused. "Stay." He stayed. He didn't ask her name. Didn't ask what happened. He just sat on the small plastic chair beside her bed and waited for her to sleep again. He never told anyone about that moment, because for the first time in his life, someone had looked him in the eye, not past him, not through him, and asked him to stay. The news didn't break until later that week. Red Hollow Weekly ran a small piece in the corner of their Thursday edition. "Unidentified child pulled from lake recovery ongoing," a paragraph or two. No photo. Just enough words to raise eyebrows. Not enough to raise hell. The internet didn't pick it up. It wasn't the kind of town that trended. But word traveled. At the diner, at the church, through thin walls and thin coffee. And everyone had a theory. She's probably from out of state. Runaway. Trafficked, poor girl. One of those foster kids, you know how that goes. No one asked why no one was looking for her. No one wondered aloud why a girl that young, that brown, could almost die in their lake, and the world didn't stop turning. But Elijah wondered. He started staying late after shift, borrowing old hospital records, flipping through missing persons flyers online, sorting photos by hair type, skin tone, age. He made a folder. Snow. He labeled it. He wasn't sure if he was looking for who she was or who had left her there. When she could finally sit up without the world spinning, she asked for paper. Elijah brought her a notepad from the front desk, along with a red pen from his pocket. He was the only one who didn't ask questions when she didn't talk. Instead, he watched her draw. She didn't sketch houses or hearts or sunshine. She drew a door. A steel one, with no handle on the inside. Next to it, a long hallway. No windows, a bowl, a single chair. She didn't explain the drawing, just pushed it toward him and stared. I think I know that hallway, Elijah whispered. She blinked slowly. My uncle used to work at Glenfield, a correctional center. They shut it down after someone leaked videos of what they did to kids inside. She said nothing. He leaned forward. You were there, weren't you? Still nothing. But the way she exhaled like a held breath, finally let go, was all the answer he needed. By the time the doctors cleared her for discharge, no one had come forward. No missing child report matched her face. Her fingerprints weren't in any federal database. It was like she didn't exist. Red Hollow didn't know what to do with children like that. So they made calls, social services, emergency shelters. None had beds open, not in January. Not with the cold like this. So they turned to the only man who'd stood by her since the moment she surfaced. Horace Mitchell, the veteran, the man with the wild eyes and the scar on his temple. The man who talked to dogs that weren't there anymore and wore his medals sewn inside his coat, close to the chest. You want me to take her? He asked, stunned. She trusts you, said the woman. From Child Protective Services. Horace looked at Snow, who stood beside the hospital bed, arms wrapped around herself. She didn't speak. But when he opened his arms, she walked into them. Horace didn't know the first thing about raising kids. The last time he'd been responsible for something small and living. It had 4 legs and a badge, but Blaze had been different. Dogs didn't carry the kind of silence this girl did. Dogs didn't wake up at 3 a.m. screaming without a sound. He let her take the cot in the church shelter where he slept sometimes, the one closest to the heater. They told him it was temporary. He told them that was fine. Nothing in his life had ever been permanent anyway. He learned quick what calmed her. Warm milk. Cracked windows, night lights. No overhead lights, no loud coughing. No keys jangling at night. And absolutely no closed doors. She wouldn't sleep with the door shut. Not even when the shelter matron told them it was policy. Horace sat in the hallway all night that first week, just so she could sleep with her door wide open. He never asked her what had been behind the door in her drawings, but he didn't need to. Whatever it was, it hadn't stayed in that building. It had followed her out. Elijah stopped by the shelter a week later. He didn't tell his mom. She wouldn't have let him go, said it wasn't his business. But he'd started carrying that red pen drawing in his pocket like a compass. He brought her a paper bag of muffins. She didn't smile, but her eyes softened when she saw him. I didn't know if you'd come, she whispered. Didn't know. If I should, he admitted. You should. They sat under the flickering hallway light, sharing banana walnut muffins in silence. Horace watched from the end of the hall, arms crossed, eyes heavy-lidded but alert. He didn't say anything, just nodded once, almost imperceptibly. When Elijah met his gaze, Snow tore a piece of her muffin and offered it to Elijah. He didn't take it. Eat it, she said. You always bring food for me. Now I'm giving back. That's when he realized this wasn't charity for her. It was balance, control. A piece of herself she was reclaiming. He took the piece, nodded, and ate it. That winter didn't thaw. The snow kept falling in Red Hollow, heavy and constant. The kind of winter that cracks skin and car batteries alike. Most people hunkered down and waited for spring to save them. But not Elijah. He kept researching, kept digging. Late nights at the school library, online forums, deep dives into archive news reports. He was looking for a girl who had vanished without a trace, and maybe, through her, a way to believe someone like him could matter. That's how he found Glenfield, a juvenile center disguised as a behavioral development institute. Shut down 8 years ago for mismanagement, no arrests, no accountability. But one article mentioned something that made his stomach twist. In 2014, Glenfield had experimented with a controversial disciplinary program called isolation therapy. Allegedly used only on extreme cases. He printed the article and showed it to Snow. Her fingers clenched around the paper before she even finished reading. Then she looked at him, eyes wide, shaking. "That's the hallway," she said. "That's where the door goes." She handed him back the paper like it was burning her fingers and whispered, "I wasn't the only one." They started meeting every Saturday after that. Sometimes in the shelter's back lot, sometimes behind the rec center where no one watched. They never talked for long. But when they did, it felt like unpacking something too heavy to hold alone. She told him she remembered a boy, younger than her, quiet, always drawing circles on the floor with his thumb. One day, he stopped. They said he moved units. She said, "But I knew what it meant." Elijah didn't say anything, just reached into his backpack and pulled out his recorder. "Want to tell me his name?" he asked gently. She shook her head. "Do you want the world to remember him?" She nodded. He pressed record, and she began to speak. Horace noticed the change. Snow laughed sometimes, now small, startled bursts like she'd forgotten she was allowed. She started humming when she folded laundry, asked for seconds when he made stew. And once, just once, he heard her singing softly under her breath. He'd never heard a more beautiful sound. The world didn't care about men like Horace, not anymore. But this girl, this quiet little storm wrapped in silence, made him feel like maybe he hadn't outlived his purpose just yet. She still had her bad days. She'd flinch if someone touched her shoulder from behind. Still checked under her bed each night. Still went quiet every time someone mentioned police or sirens. But she was healing. And for Horace, that was enough. Elijah was the first one to see the bruises. Not old ones, new. Small, faint, but distinct. Just above her wrist. They were in the middle of organizing old press cuttings together when he noticed. She tried to hide it, tugged her sleeve down, shifted the paper stack to cover it. But he'd seen, and he wasn't the same after. Elijah didn't ask her about the bruises, not right away, not even the next day. He wanted to. God, he did. The second he saw them, something in his chest turned to stone. But he knew that pushing too hard would only make her shut down again. So he waited for the quiet to tell him more than questions ever could. It came 4 nights later, in the alley behind the shelter where they sat on overturned milk crates, sipping warm tea from mismatched mugs. Snow held her cup with both hands, her sleeves tugged low again. "Is it the matron?" Elijah asked finally. She didn't answer, just stared into the steam curling up from her drink. "Horace?" His voice cracked a little, and he hated himself for it. Snow shook her head fast. "Never," she said too loudly. Then softer. "Never." "Him? Then who?" Silence. "I swear," Elijah whispered, voice tight with something between fury and fear. "If it's anyone hurting you, you can't fix everything, Eli. I can damn well try." She looked up then. The way she said his name, it was the first time she'd ever shortened it. The first time it wasn't Elijah in that slow, careful way. And the way she said it now, like it belonged to her, made something hot rise in his throat. She set down her cup. "It's not fists," she said. "It's the way they look at me when they think I'm asleep. The way they talk about my body, like it's not mine. Like I'm just a thing that survived what I shouldn't have, so now I must owe the world something." He didn't speak. Couldn't. She kept going, her voice low. "The new shelter monitor? He brushes against me on purpose. Smiles after. Tells the others he's just checking in on the miracle girl." Elijah's fists clenched. "I told the director. They said I'm imagining it. That I have trauma-based projections. Now he did speak. Let me take it public. No. Let me record it. Let me." "No, Eli." Her voice broke a little. "If you make it a story, I stop being a person. I become a headline again, a symbol, a case. That's how they take your voice. They make you a thing." He looked at her for a long time, then he said quietly, "Then let me just be here, for whatever you need." That was the night she kissed him. Not like in the movies. No big build-up. No romantic score. Just a cold alley, 2 mugs of half-drunk tea, and the soft brush of her lips against his like a question without punctuation. He kissed her back like an answer. After that, everything changed. And nothing did. They still met in stolen hours. Still didn't tell anyone. Still kept their voices low, their hands close, and their hearts careful. But when they looked at each other, something was different. It wasn't teenage lust, wasn't puppy love. It was something deeper, heavier, like they'd both been carrying half of the same secret and had only now figured out how to hold it together. Elijah began skipping his shifts at the clinic, not because he didn't need the money, but because Snow needed him more. And in his gut, he felt it coming. Something, a shift, a break in the surface. Something was about to give. He was right. It started with an anonymous tip. One of Elijah's classmates, Bethany Lynn, top of the class, yearbook editor, found one of his printed reports in the school library printer. She didn't mean to. It had just gotten jammed behind a paper tray. But she read it. And she posted it. On her blog. "The Girl Who Woke Up Under Ice. A real story the town wants you to forget." Within 2 days, it had over 8,000 shares, Reddit threads, Facebook comments, calls to the shelter, calls to the mayor's office. Snow's drawing of the steel door was now public. Her name, Naomi, her real name, recovered from a leaked Glenfield record, was now trending under #LakeGirl. She wasn't a secret anymore, and it nearly broke her. They moved her. Quickly, quietly, no warning. Elijah showed up at the shelter on a Tuesday with warm bread and a notebook full of story ideas, only to find her cot empty. Gone. Horace didn't know. The staff wouldn't say. The matron acted confused. Said maybe she got placed with a foster home. Maybe out of state. He stormed out of the shelter, fists clenched so tight his nails left crescent moons in his palms. He went home, sat in his room, didn't eat, didn't sleep. And then, the next morning, he did what Snow had begged him not to. Uploaded the audio recording of her voice. The one where she described the hallway. The boy who stopped drawing. The door that didn't open from the inside. He attached it to the blog Bethany had posted. He included one line. "They moved her so we'd forget. Don't let them." It exploded. Within 48 hours, national outlets picked it up. A news van showed up in Red Hollow. Lawyers started calling. Survivors of Glenfield came forward. Names, faces, testimonies. And then, just when it all threatened to spin out of control, a simple email landed in Elijah's inbox. Subject, unsafe. From Naomi.read@gmail.com. No message, just a location pin. He didn't ask his mother's permission, didn't pack a bag. Just took his recorder, his camera, and his heart, and got on a Greyhound. The foster home was 2 counties over. Quiet, isolated. A big house with too many kids and not enough supervision. She met him in the yard behind the shed. They didn't talk. They just held each other for a long time, as if trying to squeeze the distance out of the space between them. When she finally pulled back, she looked up at him and said, "You disobeyed me. I know. You made me a story. I made you impossible to erase." And for the first time since the lake, she smiled without sadness. They didn't waste time. Naomi didn't know how long she'd be allowed to stay before someone pulled her away again. So she and Elijah made a plan that very night. Horace drove them. He didn't ask why, didn't need to. He saw it in their faces, the way Naomi leaned forward in her seat, eyes locked on the road like it might vanish if she blinked. The way Elijah kept a hand near hers but didn't touch it, like even warmth could distract her from the mission. They reached the Glenfield site just before midnight. It was a husk of a place, now boarded windows, crumbling brick, frost clawing at the foundation. The gate had rusted off its hinges. The sign out front still read, "Glenfield Youth Behavioral Center Est, 1991, closed 2015. Horace parked the truck and stayed behind while the two of them stepped into the dark. The main building groaned in the wind. They moved slowly. Elijah's flashlight sweeping over shattered glass and peeled paint. Naomi led the way like someone walking through a dream. Her feet knew the turns before her eyes did. "This way," she whispered, taking a left at a split hallway. "How do you—" "I remember the floor tiles." And she did. They passed by old therapy rooms, each one still bearing crooked motivational posters on the walls. "Respect is earned. Hard work beats talent. You control your behavior." Naomi paused in front of one door. "Here," Elijah aimed his light. A rusted steel door. No handle on the inside. She reached out and touched it. "This is the one I drew," she said. "This is where they sent us when we screamed too loud, or cried too long, or wet the bed." He swallowed hard. "They told us it was therapy." She pushed the door open. The room was the size of a walk-in closet. Foam padding lined the walls. A single drain in the floor. Nothing else. Naomi stepped inside and froze. "Here," she whispered. "Right here. This is where Micah used to sit." "Micah?" She nodded. He drew stars with his finger on the wall every night. "I told him they'd be there for real one day when we got out." She knelt down, her hand brushing the floor. "I stopped talking to him the week before they took him, because I was scared they'd punish me if I didn't." She looked up at Elijah, eyes full of regret so sharp it cut him from across the room. "I think he died alone." Elijah joined her on the floor, his knees popping. "You survived," he said. "That doesn't make you guilty. It makes you brave." She shook her head. "No, I'm just what was left." He took her hand. "You're what they couldn't break." The next morning, Horace drove them back through snow-covered roads while Naomi slept against Elijah's shoulder. She didn't speak once during the drive. She didn't need to. She'd been heard. She'd been believed. And for now, that was enough. 2 days later, the story went national. Survivor of notorious youth center speaks out, names missing children. Elijah's photos of Glenfield. The audio of Naomi's account. The steel door. The padded room. The hand-drawn map of where Micah had sat. It all went viral. People began showing up. Other survivors. Former workers. Families of the missing. The state had no choice but to reopen the case. Naomi was offered interviews, book deals, documentaries. She said no to all of them. "I'm not a product," she told Elijah. "I'm a person." So instead, they started a blog. Just the two of them. Titled, Unburied. Each post featured a name, a drawing, a memory, a voice. No ads. No clicks. Just truth. Raw. Quiet. Undeniable. Naomi was placed in a safer home this time with a retired librarian and her husband, both veterans of foster care reform. She had her own room, her own key, her own locks. Elijah kept visiting every Sunday. Sometimes with muffins. Sometimes just with stories. They never said, "I love you." Not yet. Not in words, but sometimes. When Naomi leaned her head against his on the back porch as the sun set, or when he reached for her hand without thinking in a crowd. It was there anyway. The night before her first day at public school, Naomi called. "Horace, do you think I'll make it?" she asked. Horace chuckled through the phone. "Kid, you made it the second you breathed under that ice. Everything after, that's just bonus time." She smiled. "You think Micah would have made it too?" Horace was quiet for a moment. "I think he's proud you did." On the first day of spring, Naomi stood in front of the old Glenfield site again this time with permission. State officials, reporters. A bulldozer parked at the curb. She held Elijah's hand. When they asked if she had any words before demolition, she nodded. She pulled out a small jar of salt. "This is from the lake," she said, "where I came back." She walked to the front door of Glenfield and poured it in a line across the threshold. "To keep the memories from haunting the ground," she said. Then she turned away as the machine tore into the building. At the end of that same week, she and Elijah returned to Black Ridge Lake. The ice had melted now. The water was still. Quiet. Naomi stepped to the edge and dropped something into the SHALLOWS. Elijah leaned closer. "What was that?" She smiled. "My last drawing of the steel door." "Why?" "Because some doors don't need to be reopened." That night, they lay under a blanket of stars, side by side on a rooftop. Too young to know how long life would last, but old enough to know what they'd survived. "Do you believe in miracles?" Naomi asked. Elijah thought for a moment. "No, but I believe in people who don't quit. That's close enough." She reached for his hand, then whispered, "Eli, yeah, I love you." He didn't say anything, just pulled her closer, and let his silence mean everything it needed to. The first letter came on a Tuesday. No return address. No signature. Just her name, Naomi Reed, typed neatly on the front. And inside, a folded page of yellowed notebook paper. "You were never supposed to wake up. Stop digging. They're watching." She read it twice, then a third time. Her hands didn't shake. Not yet. It wasn't the threat that made her stomach twist. It was the tone. Cold, precise, like whoever wrote it wasn't angry. Just disappointed. She tucked the letter back into the envelope and slid it under her bed. Told no one. Not even Elijah, especially not Elijah, because he'd burn the world down if he knew someone was threatening her. And right now, she needed him to stay grounded, focused, safe. One of them had to be. Elijah had been busy. His blog post about Glenfield had turned into a full-blown investigative series. He'd started getting emails from other survivors' names, dates, handwritten maps, trauma wrapped in words so sharp they made him cry at 2 a.m. in the school library. He never showed Naomi those tears. Instead, he called her every night, read her pieces of the stories in progress, let her edit his sentences, correct his punctuation, challenge his assumptions. Sometimes they argued, gently. She had lived it. He had written it. There was a difference, but there was trust between them. A quiet balance. She told the truth. He told the world. Until the world started pushing back. The principal of East Hollow High called Elijah into her office the following week. He sat across from her, wearing his second-hand coat and holding a spiral notebook full of interviews. "You're a bright kid, Elijah," she began, smiling in that tight, professional way that meant nothing good was coming. "But lately your activism is distracting. And frankly, it's putting the school in an uncomfortable position." "What position is that?" he asked calmly. "National attention." He raised an eyebrow. "Isn't that usually a good thing?" She leaned forward, folding her hands. "Some of the families in our district, longtime donors, feel your blog is painting the town in an unfair light." Elijah didn't reply. She sighed. "I'm asking you to take a step back, for your own good. He stared at her. Thought about Naomi, about Micah, about the others. And then he said, "If you're uncomfortable with the truth, maybe it's not me you should be talking to." He stood, walked out. Didn't slam the door, but he made sure it didn't close quietly either. Naomi read about it in the paper the next morning. A local op-ed titled, "Teen Crusader or Troublemaker? Is Journalism the New Rebellion?" There was a photo of Elijah, his face blurry, caught mid-step. They'd used the word reckless. She clipped it out, folded it into a page of her journal. Not because she agreed, but because she knew what it meant to be labeled before anyone asked your name. That night, Elijah climbed through her window like he used to before everything got too serious. She was sitting on the floor, sorting books, old ones, damaged spines, ink-smudged pages, all rescued from donation bins that assumed unreadable, meant unworthy. He dropped his bag beside her and sat down. "I might get suspended." She handed him a copy of The Fire Next Time by James Baldwin. "Congratulations," she said. "You've joined a long line of troublemakers worth remembering." He chuckled softly, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. She reached for his hand. "You okay?" "No," he said, "but I'm still here. Then we're still winning." He kissed her then. Not because he wanted to forget the world, but because he remembered what they were fighting for. The second letter came on a Friday, this time. It wasn't mailed. It was slipped into her locker. Taped shut with black electrical tape. No handwriting. Just a printed sticker that read, "You think the world cares because you trend once. You're wrong." She didn't tell Elijah this time either. Instead, she burned it in the sink after school. Watched the edges curl and disintegrate into smoke. But the words stuck, not because they scared her, because she knew they were partly right. The world didn't care, not really. Not past the retweets and the headlines. Not when the next scandal came along. Not when a missing white teenager vanished from a gated community, pushing everything else down the feed. Naomi knew what it meant to be forgotten. But she also knew this. Being remembered wasn't the same as being safe. 3 nights later, she found Horace sitting on the stoop outside the library. He hadn't been by in days, not since the Glenfield demolition. His coat looked heavier, stiffer, like it was carrying something it hadn't before. "You disappeared," she said, handing him a coffee. "I went to see a man." Naomi sat down beside him. "What kind of man?" "The kind that used to wear a badge." She blinked. "Turns out," Horace said, staring into the darkness, "Glenfield wasn't the first place they used to bury kids who got inconvenient." Naomi's fingers tightened around the coffee cup. Horace didn't look at her. "Back in '89, there was a boy, Theo, black, 13, brilliant. He disappeared from a state-run home outside of Elm Creek. The report said he ran away. But the director at that home, same man who founded Glenfield 6 years later." Naomi's heart sank. "What happened to Theo?" "No one knows, but I think someone does. And that someone's still here in Red Hollow." She whispered, "Why? Are you telling me this?" Horace finally turned to her, his eyes fierce. "Because I see what you and Elijah are doing. And I believe in it. But truth without protection?" He tapped her chest gently. "It costs too much when they aim straight for the heart." Naomi didn't sleep that night, not because of the threat, or the secrets, or even the thought of someone out there watching, but because for the first time, she felt something unfamiliar, anger. Real, bone deep, marrow-hot anger. Not at them, but at herself, because some part of her still wanted to keep quiet, still wanted to survive more than speak. And she hated that part. She thought she'd buried it, frozen it under the lake, but it had followed her here. The next day, she and Elijah met with Ms. Rains, an independent journalist from Chicago, who'd been following the Glenfield story since it broke. They sat in a coffee shop just off Route 6, far enough from town to breathe without being watched. Ms. Rains was older, late 40s, sharp eyes, leather notebook. Flat voice. "I've got connections at ProPublica," she said without preamble. "If you're serious about uncovering a pattern of state-level suppression of abuse cases tied to minority children, this needs to go federal." Elijah leaned forward. "How?" "We trace the funding. Follow the names, the directors, the state budgets. You'd be surprised how often bad things survive, because good people forget to check the receipts." Naomi nodded slowly, but Ms. Raines added, "It means going all in. No school dances. No free afternoons, no safety net." Elijah didn't hesitate. "We're in." Naomi hesitated just for a second. Then she nodded. "Then we start with this," Ms. Raines said, pulling out a file. "Elm Creek, 1989. The boy was never found, but his sister? She's still alive." The trip to Elm Creek took 2 hours and a half. They borrowed Horace's truck, filled the back with blankets, flashlights, and snacks they wouldn't eat. Naomi sat behind the wheel this time. Elijah beside her, head tilted against the window. Neither spoke much. The road hummed beneath them like a warning. They found Theo's sister Angela Rivers in a red brick apartment complex near a faded basketball court. She was in her 50s now. Tired eyes, bright scarf, hands that trembled slightly when she opened the door. "I told myself," she said, after they explained why they were there, "if anyone ever came asking about my brother, I'd tell them everything." She invited them in, poured them sweet tea that tasted like sorrow, and cinnamon dot, and then she told them about how Theo had a stutter, about how the counselors made fun of it, about how he once wet the bed and had to sleep outside in January, about the last letter he ever sent her, tucked into the back of a library book he knew she'd check out. "If I'm gone, I didn't run. Find the tape." Angela never found the tape, but she kept the letter. Folded so many times it looked like cloth. Naomi stared at it for a long time. Then she asked, "Can we scan it? Share it?" Angela nodded. "But only if you promise me one thing." "Anything," Elijah said. "Don't let him just be another ghost in a paragraph. Let him be a boy. A smart, funny, stuttering, silly boy who should have gotten to grow up." Naomi reached for her hand. "We will." That night, they stayed in a cheap motel outside Elm Creek. One bed, faded curtains. The air smelled like lemon cleaner and stale dreams. They didn't touch, just lay side by side. Fingers close, but not quite meeting. Naomi stared at the ceiling. "You ever wonder what we'd be if none of this had happened?" Elijah answered without turning. "Boring." She laughed, quiet, sad. "I think about it sometimes," she said. "A version of us that just went to homecoming. Thought about which movie to see. Made playlists instead of protest signs." He finally turned to face her. "I wouldn't trade this version of you for anything." Her voice softened. "Even with the trauma?" He brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. "Especially with it." And this time, when they kissed, it wasn't about survival. It was about choosing each other, even when the world never had. Horace sat alone at the kitchen table. The letter spread in front of him like an old wound split open again. He hadn't touched the scotch. It just sat there, sweating against the side of the glass, untouched. The only thing moving in the room was the ceiling fan, ticking like a broken clock. He had waited 33 years to forget that name. Theo Rivers. But the past doesn't rot. Not when you bury it in guilt. It waits. It grows roots. And one day, it climbs back up through the cracks of your life. He had known Theo long before Glenfield, back when Horace still wore a badge. Red Hollow, 1989. Horace had been young then, clean-shaved, newly transferred. Trying to make good on his badge, even if the town didn't quite know what to do with a black cop in uniform. He'd been assigned to review reports from a nearby youth home, Elm Creek. Nothing major, just welfare checks, incident reports, paperwork. No one wanted, until he met Theo. Bright kid. Funny. Listened to music through his glasses because he'd taped a tiny speaker inside the temple arm. He loved space. Drew rockets on napkins. Talked about becoming a NASA engineer. And stuttered. Bad. One day, Theo showed Horace a notebook. They lock us in closets, he'd written. They say it's for therapy. Horace had taken the note. Straight to his supervisor. The report disappeared. A week later, Theo was gone. Ran away, they said. Horace didn't believe it. Still didn't, but he didn't fight it either, because back then, he still believed in the system, and the system thanked him with silence. He never saw Theo again. Now, decades later, Theo's name was back on a folded page in Naomi's hand. Horace had heard Elijah and Naomi whispering in the living room, tracing timelines, laying out theories. They hadn't said it aloud, but he knew they were circling around it. Who funded Glenfield? Who protected its founder? Who signed off on early behavioral experiments? Horace's old training officer. Cole, Maddox's father. The same man who vanished under suspicious circumstances 20 years ago. Before his son ended up shot in the woods. Everything was connected, and Horace hated himself for not seeing it sooner. The next morning, he showed up at Naomi's porch holding a manila folder. She opened the door still in her sweatshirt and socks, blinking sleep from her eyes. Horace? He didn't speak. Just handed her the folder. Inside were photocopies, his old field notes, the missing memo from 1989, a grainy photo of Theo in front of a science fair trifold board, and a copy of a Glenfield proposal, one Horace had stamped. Received in a corner. She looked up at him, lips parted. You were there, he nodded, and I didn't stop it. Elijah stepped into the doorway behind her, already reading over her shoulder. But you remembered, Naomi whispered. And you kept the proof. Horace's voice cracked. I didn't save him. But maybe you still can. They sent the file to Ms. Rains, who sent it straight to the Department of Justice. That same week, a formal investigation was opened into the Glenfield Trust and its affiliated institutions. Across 3 states, dozens of cases reopened. 5 arrests. 3 resignations. And 1 memorial, quietly approved, to be placed outside what used to be Elm Creek. At the request of Naomi, Angela, and Elijah, the plaque reads simply, ****, in memory of the children the world tried to forget. We remember you. We are still here. ***, on the 1-year anniversary of Naomi's rescue. They returned to Blackridge Lake. The water was calm now. No snow. No warnings, just the sun glinting off ripples, and the quiet. Naomi stepped to the shore with Elijah beside her. Horace waited by the truck, arms crossed but smiling softly. She knelt down and placed a small, sealed bottle in the water. Inside it, a copy of Theo's note. And a new one, written in her own hand. You didn't run. We found you. Thank you for holding on long enough for us to come back. The bottle drifted out. Caught in the breeze. She stood, took Elijah's hand, and whispered, Ready? He nodded. Together, they turned from the lake not to forget it, but to carry it forward. Because now they had a list of names. A map of buried places, and a promise to keep. By the time the 3rd fire burned, nobody called it coincidence anymore. First was a courthouse file room in Ohio. The second, a social worker's home office in Kentucky. The third, a non-profit in Detroit. One that had recently digitized over 100 case files connected to Glenfield and its sister facilities. Each fire, each city, each time, no fingerprints, no suspects, no footage, but Naomi knew. So did Elijah, and this time they weren't just chasing ghosts. They were confronting the ones who knew exactly where the bodies were buried, because they were the ones who paid for the shovels. Naomi sat at the kitchen counter, scrolling through headlines. The screen lit up her face, cold and blue in the early morning darkness. Suspicious blaze destroys archive linked to foster care allegations. Another fire. Another dead end. Is someone erasing the past? Her hand trembled slightly as she scrolled, but not from fear, from fury. Look at this, she said, turning the screen toward Elijah. He read quickly, lips pressing into a thin line. Same language again, he said. No evidence of arson, but officials can't rule out foul play. It's like they're writing a script. Naomi nodded. They're not just trying to bury evidence. They're daring us to notice. He looked at her. Then let's make them regret it. They started with the money. The Glenfield Foundation, officially dissolved in 2016, had been resurrected under a new name, Larkhill Advancement Initiative, now posing as a think tank focused on youth re-entry and justice innovation. Nice words, slick website, corporate partnerships, tax-exempt. But beneath the PR veneer were familiar names. Naomi recognized them from the original board of Glenfield. Shell company owners, campaign donors, former legislators turned consultants. One of them had even hosted a panel titled Resilience in the Post-Trauma Generation. Standing on stage with a TED-style microphone and a smile Naomi wanted to slap off his face. Elijah ran their names through public databases. Campaign finance records, real estate registries. One connection stood out. Parkwell Holdings, a private equity firm based in Chicago. It had invested in Larkhill's new training campuses. It also had shares in for-profit juvenile centers across 7 states. And Parkwell's CEO? Mason Greeley, a man who once testified that too many social programs reward weakness. A man who, in 1995, donated the land Glenfield was built on. A man who until now had never been linked to the abuse that happened behind those locked padded doors. The plan was simple, and stupid, and dangerous, but that never stopped them before. They would infiltrate a Larkhill-sponsored event in Chicago, pretend to be scholarship applicants, hit close to Greeley's team, maybe even Greeley himself. Record everything. Naomi hated the idea, not because it was risky, but because it meant stepping into a space that pretended to care while profiting off pain. Still, she agreed. Because truth didn't come cheap, and she was done living quietly. Horace didn't like it. You're poking the bear, kid, he warned her. Naomi folded her arms. The bear already burned 3 buildings. This is self-defense, Horace sighed. And what happens when the bear claws back? She smiled thinly. We bleed louder. He muttered under his breath, then reached for his keys. At least let me drive. The Chicago summit was held at the Larkhill Urban Renewal Center. Glass walls, soft jazz, and LED lights that masked the stench of hypocrisy. Naomi wore a navy blazer and jeans. Elijah donned a thrifted button-up and tie. They looked like a couple of smart kids trying to escape poverty, which, ironically, was exactly what the pamphlet said Larkhill existed for. They were given badges, smiles, brochures, but no one looked them in the eyes for too long. At lunch, they split up. Naomi lingered near a table of donors. Elijah joined a breakout panel on juvenile entrepreneurship through blockchain. He almost laughed. Almost. Instead, he asked a sharp question about data privacy. A woman in a burgundy suit approached him afterward. You seem passionate. She said, Are you part of a program? I'm applying, he replied. My girlfriend too. She's into behavioral reform. The woman smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Be careful, she said. Ambition burns fast in places like this. Meanwhile, Naomi found herself cornered by a man in his 60s. 210 for February, wearing a watch worth more than the car Horace drove. Mason Greeley, he said, extending a hand. And you are? Naomi took it. A believer in second chances, he chuckled. Aren't we all? She smiled, tight and polite. He didn't recognize her. Not yet. Not as the girl from the lake. Not as the name on the federal documents now investigating his holdings. But he would, and when he did, She wanted to be the last face he saw before the whole facade came crashing down. Elijah had never worn a wire before. It wasn't really a wire, just a tiny lapel mic clipped behind his tie and connected to Naomi's phone through an app Horace had shown them. Crude, illegal in most states, but Illinois? One-party consent. And today, Elijah was that one party. He ducked into the men's room, adjusted the collar of his shirt, and checked the Bluetooth signal on his phone. Still live, back in the main hall. The summit's afternoon sessions had split off again: panels, mingling zones, photo ops. Naomi texted him 2 words. They're moving. He slipped out the side entrance and followed the hallway down to the investor lounge, which was really just a slick, glass-enclosed room with bar carts and uncomfortable couches. Naomi stood near the snack table, pretending to be interested in beet chips. 2 men had just walked in. Mason Greeley, of course, and another man Naomi had seen in old campaign photos: Michael Stroud, former state senator, now director of the Ethics and Youth Justice Initiative. The irony made her stomach turn. They didn't notice her, but they were loud enough not to have to. I told you, Stroud was saying. The fires weren't enough. Paper trails are getting digital. Greeley sipped his drink. Then you better digitize better. Congress is sniffing again. You saw the DOJ request. I saw it, but I also saw the numbers. He leaned closer. Do you know what we made last quarter? Just off that one pilot site in St. Louis? $500,000. From trauma workshops, virtual ones. Stroud chuckled. Trauma has always been a profitable resource. Naomi felt the room tilt. You can't control the narrative forever. Stroud added. We don't have to, Greeley replied. We just have to outlast the outrage. Elijah leaned against the hallway wall, phone in hand, heart in his throat. He had heard enough. He pressed stop recording and sent the audio file to Ms. Raines, encrypted and backed up 3 ways. Then he walked away fast. Naomi followed 5 minutes later, her face pale. They didn't speak until they were back in Horace's truck. Naomi sat in the passenger seat, breathing through her teeth. Elijah drove. When they crossed the state line, she finally said, they're making money off therapy, grief, rehabilitation. They're monetizing trauma like it's a brand, Elijah said. She laughed once sharp and bitter. Pain is a subscription service. Back in Red Hollow, things moved quickly. Ms. Raines published the recording cleaned, verified, and corroborated with financial data. The article trended within 24 hours. 3 major news networks picked it up. Parkwell Holdings issued a statement calling the recording selectively edited and unrepresentative of the full conversation. 2 days later, their stock dropped 11%. By the end of the week, congressional hearings were scheduled. Naomi should have felt something like victory, but instead, she felt watched, like her name had been carved onto a chalkboard in a room full of powerful, angry men. And then came the letter. Again. This time delivered to her school locker with a thumb drive attached. She opened it in the library with Elijah standing behind her, arms crossed. On the drive was one file. A video. Not of her. Of Micah, the boy from Glenfield who'd helped her escape, who'd disappeared again after they were rescued. In the video, he was sitting in what looked like a basement, a bruise under his eye, mumbling something inaudible. A voice behind the camera said, "Let's see how brave your little activists are when they learn what silence buys." Then the screen cut to black. Naomi stared. Elijah whispered, "They took him. They called Horace. They called Ms. Raines. But neither could trace the origin of the video. The metadata had been wiped. No geolocation. No timestamp. Whoever made it knew what they were doing. Naomi sat on her porch steps that night, legs tucked under her hoodie, Rusty sleeping beside her. Elijah stood nearby, pacing. "We can't walk away," he said. She didn't answer. He crouched in front of her. "Say something." She looked up. They're not just hiding evidence. They're hiding children. He reached for her hand. I'm with you. She nodded. Then let's go find him. They started with the clothes in the video. Micah was wearing a hoodie Naomi recognized, black with the words "Truth Rises" in spray paint font. She'd given it to him herself at the safe house in Fairfield, just before the state relocated him under temporary protection. But that hoodie had been stolen. She remembered the call from the social worker 3 weeks later. Someone had broken into the storage unit where the kids' belongings were kept. It hadn't made sense then. It did now. They had kept the HOODIE because they wanted this to look like it was happening now. Elijah ran the video through frame-by-frame enhancement, checking for flickers, shadows, anything in the background. He paused on a frame where Micah blinked, and behind him, a fluorescent light flickered. In a very specific pattern, 3 short. 2 long, 1 short again. Morse code. Naomi gasped. Ça va, ami. They found the camera angle again, this time with a faint metal grate in the top right corner. That vent doesn't look residential, Elijah said. Could be industrial. Maybe storage or underground. Naomi remembered something. The Glenfield site. When it was first raided, agents had mentioned a network of decommissioned tunnels beneath the structure, some of which had never been mapped. They're keeping him underground, she whispered. Somewhere no one would think to look. Elijah opened a digital map of Red Hollow, the old municipal tunnels, he said. Before the sewer upgrades, the state never demolished them. Just sealed the access points. Naomi stood up. Then, we unseal one. It took them a day to find the right one, near an abandoned train yard on the edge of town, hidden behind rusted fencing and kudzu vines. Horace helped them pry open the storm gate with a crowbar. Inside, the air was thick and stale, smelling of damp concrete and dust. Naomi held her flashlight tightly, knuckles white. Elijah followed close behind. The walls were lined with graffiti, some recent, some decades old. Run, one said, in dripping red letters. They walked half a mile in silence before they heard it. A cough, then a chain rattle, then his voice. Naomi? He was thinner. Paler, but alive. Micah sat in a folding chair, hands zip-tied, a cut across his eyebrow. Around him, plastic sheets hung like cheap curtains, a cot, a bucket, a tray of untouched food. When he saw her, he cried. I thought they killed you. Naomi rushed forward. I'm here. We're here. Elijah cut the ties. Micah sobbed into Naomi's HOODIE. Then whispered. They said if I talked, they'd send me back to where the other kids went. But there are no other kids. Just boxes, names, Elijah asked. Boxes? Micah nodded. Filing cabinets, full of names. Naomi's voice broke. Can you take us there? Micah wiped his nose. I never saw where they brought me in. But when they fed me, I heard trains. Elijah checked the map again. There's a freight line a block east. That tunnel connects to the old loading depot. They carried him out. Together. It was Miss Raines who called in the location. Within hours, federal agents swept the depot. They found 17 filing cabinets, some decades old, names of 642 miners, over 200 video cassettes marked compliance test, a ledger of donor payments to Glenfield, some backdated to 1987, and in a corner, locked behind steel, a room with 4 cots still warm. They were too late to catch anyone, but not too late to expose everything. The scandal broke globally, modern day. Gulag for black and brown children. One paper called it $4 billion industry fueled by suffering. Another said Parkwell Holdings dissolved within weeks. Mason Greeley was subpoenaed. Michael Stroud disappeared. The president gave a statement, called it a national disgrace. But Naomi didn't celebrate, because 3 children were still missing, because Glenfield wasn't alone. And because Micah still woke up screaming, On a cold spring morning, Naomi walked to the lake. Not the one she'd almost died in. A different one. Still, the ice on the surface was melting the same way, quiet, invisible from underneath. Elijah stood beside her. "They tried to freeze us," she said. He looked at her. "But we woke up." She turned to him, voice soft. "You really still want to do this? With me? Even if it means spending our lives fighting shadows?" He took her hand. "No one else I'd rather fight beside." She kissed him long, quiet, certain, not because she was grateful, because she believed. Naomi sat in the waiting room of the Capitol building, hands clenched tight in her lap. The suit she wore itched. Not because it was cheap, it wasn't. Ms. Raines had made sure she had something respectable, something clean. But Naomi hated how it made her feel, polished, silent, like she was supposed to be grateful to be here at all. The double doors opened. A woman in gray called her name, Elijah. Rose with her. They walked in together. The hearing room was packed. Cameras, suits. Some senators whispered. Others stared. Naomi's chair squeaked as she sat. A microphone waited. She swallowed, then leaned in, and began. "My name is Naomi Reed. I was 14 years old when the state of Kentucky sent me to a place called Glenfield Behavioral Youth Center." The silence in the room turned sharp. They called it therapy. They said I was broken. They never asked what broke me. She told them about the ice, the basement, the dog she fed through the bars, Micah, Theo, the letters, the fires. She didn't cry, not once. When she finished, Elijah stood. "You've heard Naomi's story, but it's not just hers. There are hundreds of kids like her. The only reason you're hearing their names now is because someone decided their pain wasn't profitable anymore." He held up a file. "This is a list of every child moved through Glenfield between 1990 and 2015. Some are dead. Some disappeared. Some were deported under made-up charges, but all of them mattered. And none of them mattered to the people in this room until someone got caught." The room buzzed. The chairman banged the gavel, but the truth was out. That night, Naomi and Elijah walked back to their hotel through D.C.'s rain-slick streets. They didn't speak. Didn't need to. Back upstairs, Naomi took off her heels and sat on the edge of the bed. "I feel like I just buried myself again," she said. Elijah knelt in front of her. "You didn't bury anything," he said. "You gave it breath." She looked down. "What if this isn't enough?" He reached into his bag, pulled out an envelope. "I didn't want to show you until we got through today." Inside were 2 passports and a letter. A journalism fellowship. 1 year abroad. Joint award. Naomi blinked. "You applied for both of us?" "I told them you were the best researcher I knew." She laughed. Then cried. And that night, for the first time in what felt like years, she dreamed of something other than running. 3 months later, while walking through a crowded market in Lisbon, Naomi got a call. She almost didn't answer. The number was unknown, but something in her chest said yes. The voice on the other end was gravelly. "Familiar? Naomi?" She froze. "Who is this?" "My name is Angela Rivers, I think. I think I'm your mother." Everything spun. And part 3 ended not with a bang but with a voice. One Naomi hadn't heard since she was 4 years old, calling her home. The phone slipped slightly in Naomi's hand, slick with the warmth of Lisbon sunlight and the cold sweat of memory. She stared across the bright outdoor market, colors blurring as the voice on the other end said her name again, Angela. The name she'd buried in a box sealed with foster files, adoption decrees, and whispers that always ended in ellipses. Angela Rivers, her mother. At first, Naomi couldn't breathe. Couldn't form a sentence. Just stood there, staring at Elijah, who was haggling with a street vendor over a jar of smoked olives. "Naomi?" The voice asked again, and this time she managed to croak out, "How did you find me?" The voice hesitated. "Someone sent me your testimony. The Senate hearing. I saw your face. I knew it was you. I never stopped looking. Naomi felt her knees buckle. She sat down hard on a bench, heedless of the pigeons that scattered. For a moment, she could still feel the padded walls of Glenfield, the sharp chill of basement air, the cold breath of memory turning her inside out. She had imagined this moment before, hundreds of times. It never felt like this. She should have shouted, demanded, accused, but what came out was barely more than a whisper. Where were you? The voice cracked. Prison, then shelters, then gone. I was never well. They took you while I was sick, but I never gave up. I just never had anything to prove it was you. A part of Naomi wanted to hang up. The part that still clenched at every authority figure. The part that didn't believe in redemption. But another part, the one that believed in Theo and Micah and Elijah, that part wanted to listen, wanted to know, wanted to see her face. 2 hours later, she sat alone in a quiet cafe near the Alfama district, waiting. Elijah had offered to come. She'd said no. If this was a mistake, it needed to be hers alone. She spotted the woman before the woman saw her. Shorter than she remembered, hair longer, more gray than black, but the eyes, they were hers. Naomi stood, heart pounding. The woman froze at the entrance, uncertain. Naomi nodded once. The woman came forward. When they embraced, it wasn't dramatic. No tears, just quiet pressure, a lean into memory. And then, breath, life, connection. They talked for hours, about everything and nothing. About Glenfield, about the foster homes, about a mother who had tried, failed, and never stopped regretting. Angela hadn't known about the experiments, about the files, about how deeply her daughter had been broken. She wept, Naomi didn't. She had already bled those tears. But when Angela reached across the table and took her hand, Naomi didn't pull away. Later that night, walking back to their flat, Naomi told Elijah everything. He listened without interrupting. At the door, he looked at her, eyes warm. Do you trust her? Naomi stared at the floor, then up. I want to. That's something, right? Elijah nodded. It's enough. They returned to the States 2 months later. The press had calmed. The hearings faded. But the work had only just begun. Naomi and Elijah started an archive. A living memorial. Names, faces, records. Every child who passed through Glenfield. Every facility tied to Larkhill, Parkwell, and their shell companies. It was called the Icebreaker Project, because sometimes survival meant cracking through the surface of silence until breath found you. One night, while sorting boxes of anonymized letters, Naomi found a name she hadn't seen in years. Not Micah, not Theo, but someone older. A girl from her early group sessions, Camila, the one who sang through the vents when they locked her alone. The letter was a confession. Camila had survived barely. But she had become something else. Not an advocate, not an activist. Something colder. She had been recruited by a security contractor, one of the firms tied to Glenfield, and now she wanted out. They're planning something, the letter said. Not just kids this time. They're using the model testing social stress response. In adults, immigrant camps, psychiatric holds. Places no one checks. Naomi read the letter 3 times, then called Elijah. They both knew what this meant. Glenfield was just the beginning. And the next chapter would be darker, deeper, and far more dangerous. But Naomi didn't flinch. Because once you've walked through ice, you stop fearing fire. You walk forward anyway. Even if your breath still shows in the air. Naomi hadn't heard that voice in 11 years. It was cracked with age, laced with static, and yet something in the rhythm, the softness between syllables, struck her like a match to old grief. Naomi, the voice said again, quieter this time, unsure. She didn't speak. She couldn't. Elijah was beside her, holding her suitcase in one hand and a boarding pass in the other. But now even the gate behind them, the announcer's voice, the chime of boarding Group C faded into muffled noise. "Mom," she whispered. "Naomi, baby. I'm sorry. I didn't know how to reach you. I didn't think you'd want to hear from me after." The line cut for a second, static, then silence. Then breathing. "After I left." Naomi gripped the phone tighter. "Where are you?" Her voice cracked. Elijah turned toward her, concern blooming in his expression. "I'm in Baton Rouge," the voice said. I'm not well, and I need you." The words sank into her chest like cold water. For years, Naomi had told herself she no longer needed a mother. That she was raised by systems, by scars, by strangers, by survival. But hearing that voice again unhooked a lock she didn't even realize still hung inside her. She closed her eyes. "I'm supposed to fly out tonight. There's a fellowship in Geneva." "I know," her mother said quietly. "I saw you on TV. You were so brave, but I don't need you forever. Just ... Come for a day, please." Naomi felt the world splitting into timelines, one where she stepped onto that plane, and one where she turned back and opened a door sealed since she was a child. Elijah didn't say anything. He didn't have to. When she looked at him, his eyes only said, "Whatever you choose, I'm with you." So she canceled the flight. They rented a car. 8 hours later, they were driving through humid Louisiana air under a canopy of weeping oaks. The sky the color of ash before rain. Baton Rouge wasn't what Naomi remembered. The neighborhood she grew up in had long been bulldozed, and in its place stood a soulless row of low-income complexes with identical beige siding. She found her mother in apartment 2C, behind a door that stuck and a hallway that smelled like damp drywall. Her mother looked smaller, grayer, not old, exactly, but hollowed. Time had carved lines around her eyes and mouth like the roots of something buried. "You came," she said. Naomi nodded. "You called." There was tea on the stove. A chipped couch. An oxygen tank in the corner. Her mother's name was Cynthia, but Naomi had stopped using it in her head long ago. Cynthia sat slowly. "I didn't know how to find you. I saw the stories. What you went through. I can't imagine." Naomi sat across from her, silent. "I didn't leave because I stopped loving you," Cynthia said, her voice brittle. "I left because I thought you were better off without me." Naomi's jaw clenched. "That's not how it felt." "I know," Cynthia whispered. "I know. But there are things I never told you, about your father. About why Glenfield was even on their radar. Why they came for you." Naomi's breath hitched. "What?" Cynthia looked at her hands. "Your father wasn't just a mechanic. He was a whistleblower. He worked security at a facility in Ohio. Not Glenfield, but connected. He tried to speak out about what they were doing to kids, poor kids, mostly Black and Latino. Experimental education methods, behavior correction, isolation, therapy. He leaked documents. They threatened him. And then he vanished." Naomi's stomach twisted. "You told me he died in a car crash." "That's what they told me too," Cynthia said. "Until years later, when I found his name erased from all the public records, like he never existed." Naomi felt the room blur, her thoughts shattering and reforming into something sharper. "They came for me because of him," Cynthia nodded. "I think they knew you were his daughter. They wanted leverage, or revenge, or silence. I never knew the whole reason. I just know that 2 weeks after I went to the police, I lost you." Naomi stood. Her body trembled, but her voice didn't. "Why are you telling me now?" Cynthia looked up, eyes glassy. "Because I'm dying. And because you deserve the whole truth. You always did." Outside, Elijah sat in the rental, scrolling through the files Naomi had compiled over the years. When she emerged, he looked up. "You okay?" She got in beside him. My father tried to stop them before I was even born. He didn't speak. Just reached for her hand. I think there's more, she said. More than Glenfield, more than Parkwell. A legacy of silence that spans decades. And if we don't cut the root, this will keep happening. Elijah nodded. Then we go back to the beginning. She looked at him. Ohio. He put the car in gear. Let's go find your father's ghost. The drive to Ohio took 10 hours. Naomi didn't sleep. Her fingers alternated between skimming old documents and gripping the edge of her seat every time the wind pressed against the car like a warning. Elijah drove in silence most of the way, music low, his mind visibly spinning. They reached Camden Falls just past midnight, a town that had once boomed with manufacturing but now lay hollowed by decades of outsourcing and silence. Naomi had been there once when she was 8. Her father had taken her to a summer fair with corn dogs and fireworks, and she remembered thinking the stars were brighter there. Now the town felt dim and wary. The motel clerk barely looked up as she handed them a key. The room smelled like mothballs and regret. Naomi sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out the folder labeled McAllister Reform Initiative. It was the name of the facility where her father had worked. The name had only come up once in any public record, a buried line in a 1994 county budget review, noting maintenance costs for disused behavioral center site. But the address matched the one Naomi found scrawled in the margin of a postcard her father had written months before his disappearance. Elijah pulled up the property on satellite maps. Trees, barbed fences, a dirt road leading to what looked like 3 squat buildings in a clearing, 2 of them boarded up, one partially collapsed. We should wait until morning, Elijah said. We'll need light. Naomi nodded, but neither of them slept. They arrived at the site just after sunrise. The forest was thick, the air soaked with dew and silence. Naomi pushed open the fence, still intact, still padlocked, but rusted enough that one kick shattered the chain. They stepped through carefully, Rusty sniffing the ground ahead of them, ears twitching. The buildings loomed like abandoned punishment, windows cracked, doors swollen shut from time and weather. Inside, it smelled of mildew and secrets. The first building had once been a dormitory. Metal cots lay in rows, some still with stained mattresses. Naomi ran her fingers along the peeling wall, where someone had carved the letters UNDO into the plaster. What do you think it means? Elijah asked. Undo what they did, she whispered. In the second building, they found files. Real ones, untouched, hidden in a locked cabinet behind a fake supply closet. Naomi's heart raced as she flipped through the folders. Photos of children, intake forms, names, ages, ethnicity, treatment codes, and then her father's handwriting. In red ink across the top of one file, illegal sedation protocol, immediate danger to subjects. Reported to supervisor March 17, 94. The next page had a typed note, subject transferred to Glenfield. Outcome unknown, Elijah whispered. They moved them from here to there. This was phase 1. Naomi kept flipping. One file stopped her cold. It had her last name. Daniels Naomi. She wasn't even 5. Her photo was stapled to the corner. And below it, observed response to long-term parental separation. Marked resilience, behavioral inhibition. Genetic candidate, level 2. She dropped the folder. Elijah caught it. They had a file on you. Before Glenfield. She nodded. They knew me before I even knew what they were. Her father hadn't worked security at McAllister. He had been a whistleblower from the inside. And the more she read, the more the pieces locked into place. Glenfield was never the beginning. It was a continuation. A second stage. An experiment in control, born out of places like McAllister, where compliance was tested, where children were divided, labeled, and sorted like cattle for a system too vast and invisible for most to name. Behind the last cabinet, Naomi found a box labeled Redline Cases Sealed. Inside were cassette tapes, actual tapes. Elijah found an old player. They inserted the first tape. The audio crackled, then came a man's voice, sharp, urgent, weary. "This is Daniel Daniels. Security clearance 5A. I am recording this as evidence. Today I witnessed a child subjected to restraint without cause for a duration of over 6 hours. This is not reform. This is torture." Naomi's breath caught. It was him, her father, his voice, alive on magnetic tape. He continued, "They said if I filed a report again, I'd be reassigned. I told them I'd go to the press. They laughed. Said no one listens to poor men with darker skin." A pause. Then, "If anything happens to me, please find Naomi. Tell her I tried." Tears burned down Naomi's face before she realized they'd started. Elijah put a hand on her back. She sat there, letting her father's voice fill the empty room. The ghosts in the walls pressing closer, not with menace, but with memory. He hadn't abandoned her. He had died trying to save others. And now it was her turn to carry that voice forward. Naomi didn't sleep that night. Neither did Elijah. They spent hours digitizing the tapes, photographing every document, scanning pages into encrypted backups, sending copies to Ms. Rains, to Horace, to 3 reporters who still picked up when Naomi called. But there was something off. A silence. In the town. Too still. Too expectant. The motel clerk looked up when they came in, as if surprised they'd returned, as if he'd been told they wouldn't. At 3:12 a.m., the fire alarms went off. The room next to theirs, room 8, was ablaze. Not an electrical fire, accelerant. Smoke roared under the door, and Elijah barely had time to yank Naomi out through the bathroom window. Rusty jumped down after them, barking wildly. By the time the fire trucks arrived, 3 rooms were gone. No casualties. No leads. Just a melted hard drive. Not theirs, but someone's. Naomi knew the message. She'd received it in more subtle forms before. Now it was louder, cruder. "We see you. Stop digging, or burn." But she didn't stop. The next morning, she called in the biggest favor she had left. A live interview on national television, hosted by Clarissa Dubois, black journalist, known for dragging corrupt governors and unflinching truth. Naomi arrived at the studio wearing her father's old watch and holding a flash drive with the recordings. Clarissa didn't ask for a script. "Start where it hurts," she said. Naomi looked into the camera. Her voice didn't shake. "My name is Naomi Daniels. When I was a child, I was taken into a youth behavioral facility called Glenfield. I was told I needed correction. But what I really needed was protection. My father worked for another facility before Glenfield, McAllister. He uncovered patterns of abuse and tried to expose them. He disappeared. Now I know why." She played the tape. Her father's voice echoed across the country. Clarissa's show was picked up by 5 affiliate networks. Within hours, the Department of Health and Human Services announced an urgent review. Within 48 hours, the Department of Justice opened a federal inquiry. But something else happened too. Whistleblowers, dozens, former counselors, nurses, janitors, drivers, people who had worked in facilities with different names but identical tactics. They wrote in, sent photos, submitted reports. A map was drawn. Glenfield was only one pin. McAllister another. But there were more. Louisiana, Missouri, Indiana. A constellation of control, designed to disappear children who didn't fit. Naomi and Elijah followed the leads like detectives with nothing left to lose. Every town held a secret. Every file had redactions. But the web grew clearer. A corporate shell called Orpheum Equity had been funding these programs for over 20 years. Different names, different faces. Same goal: break the kids who resist, sell the ones who comply. On paper, They called it behavioral conversion. In practice, it was psychological warfare. Naomi stood before Congress 2 weeks later. Not in a courtroom. In a hearing room packed with journalists and politicians who'd once looked the other way. She brought the folder marked red line cases. She read names aloud. Micah's, her own, her father's. She finished with one sentence. We are not anomalies. We are what happens when the system runs exactly how it was designed to. There was applause, not from the politicians. From the people in the back rows, the survivors. Kids who had aged out. Mothers who never stopped searching. Men and women whose silence had rotted their bones. Afterward, Naomi and Elijah walked into the sunlight, and for the first time in weeks, it didn't feel like a spotlight. It felt like warmth. Like something was breaking open. But change is never safe. A week later, a car followed them home. Not subtle, not sloppy. Just visible enough to be a reminder. One night, Naomi's tires were slashed. Another night, Elijah received an envelope with a blank disc inside. No message, no name. Just fear, hand-delivered. Ms. Rains warned them. Power fights hardest when it's cornered. Naomi replied, "Then let's keep it against the wall." She launched a public archive, the McAllister Files. Open source, uncensored, verified. Victims could upload their records. Whistleblowers could submit tips anonymously. The site crashed 3 times. In the first day from traffic, it was downloaded in over 20 countries. College students printed the logo on shirts. Protesters held up signs. We are the red line. But the hardest part wasn't the public battle. It was the private one. Naomi hadn't spoken to her mother. Since Ohio, Cynthia had called, left a voicemail. Just wanted to hear your voice again, even if it's on TV. Naomi saved the message. Didn't respond. Elijah understood. He never pushed. But one night, while they sat watching the snowfall, over the Red Hollow Lake, he asked, "If you were alive, what would you say to your father now?" Naomi looked at him, eyes distant. "I'd tell him I found the others, and that the truth didn't die with him." Elijah nodded. "And your mom?" Naomi smiled faintly. "I'm not ready. But maybe I will be." Rusty barked in the distance. The ice on the lake began to crack, not dangerously, but gently, as if spring was announcing itself through the tiniest fractures. Naomi stood. "I think it's time," she said. "Time for what?" Elijah asked. She looked at him with something like peace in her eyes. To stop surviving and start living. He rose beside her, brushed snow from her shoulder. "Together?" "Always," she said. And they walked forward, not into another courtroom, or facility, or fire, but into a future still haunted, still messy. But there's Naomi thought she had buried all the ghosts. But grief, she'd learned, wasn't something you laid to rest. It was something you walked beside. And some days, it walked a little too close. 3 weeks after the archive went live, Naomi received an encrypted message through the Redline portal. No name, no IP trace. Just 5 words. He's not where they buried him. It came with coordinates. Somewhere deep in the Arizona desert, off-grid, marked only by a latitude and longitude that pointed to nothing. At first, she didn't believe it. The rational part of her called it bait, a distraction, or worse, a trap. But she couldn't ignore the way her hands trembled, the way her breath hitched. Because if there was even a chance her father was alive, she had to find out. Elijah was quiet when she told him, not because he disagreed, because he understood the weight of hope. Hope had teeth, and it didn't let go easily. "I'll go with you," he said simply. "Even if it's a lie?" she asked. "Especially if it's a lie," he replied. "You shouldn't have to face it alone. They didn't tell anyone. Not Rains, not Horace, not the press. They packed light, rented a Jeep, and drove west until the roads disappeared and the sky turned copper. The coordinates led them to an abandoned outpost, an old radio tower, long inactive, surrounded by nothing but sand, scrub, and silence. They arrived at sunset. The tower cast a long shadow across the earth, and in that shadow stood a trailer. No windows. No markings, just a rusted door with a keypad and a deadbolt. Naomi stared at it for a long time. What if it's not him? She whispered. Elijah took her hand. Then we walk away. Together, she nodded. Then typed her father's badge number into the keypad. The lock clicked inside. It smelled of old paper and disinfectant. The trailer was cold, artificially so, and lined with metal shelves, folders, equipment, and a man. He sat in the far corner, a cot behind him, a laptop in front. Gray hair, lined face. Skin darker than hers, eyes sharper than the desert wind. When he looked up, Naomi felt her knees weaken. Because she didn't recognize him, not exactly. But something in the set of his mouth, the way his eyes flicked across her face as if counting memories, was familiar. Naomi, he said, not a question, a confirmation. Like he'd been saying it to himself for years. She stepped forward slowly. You're not dead. No, he said. But I stopped living a long time ago. Her voice broke. Why? The man her father said with effort. Because if I stayed alive in the open, they'd find you. And if they found you, they'd bury you the way they buried the others. Naomi swallowed hard. So you let me believe you were gone? Would you have fought as hard if I hadn't? He asked, not cruelly, but honestly. She didn't. Answer, she couldn't. I watched, he said, every article, every speech. I saw you become stronger than I ever was. And I hated myself for not being beside you. Elijah stepped forward, protective. Why now? He asked. The man looked at him. Because the system is cracking. And I still have pieces to give. He opened a drawer. Pulled out a black folder. These are the real files. The ones I couldn't leak. The ones that would have gotten you killed before you even knew how to fight. Naomi opened the folder. Inside were contracts, names, signatures, government seals. A 30-year trail of money, power, and missing children. Some names she recognized, others she didn't. One name stood out. Clarissa Dubois. Naomi froze. This can't be right. It is, her father said. Not everyone who helps you is clean. Some help you because you're useful. When you're not, they turn. Naomi's heart pounded. Clarissa had given her the platform. Given her the air to breathe her truth. No, she whispered. She's been with us since the beginning. Her father's voice was low. People don't choose sides, they choose survival. Elijah placed a hand on her back. We verify, before we accuse. Naomi nodded. But inside her, something had cracked. Her father handed her a key. There's a safe house in Denver. Inside is everything else. Every child that was never found. Every lie they sold. Naomi took the key. Come with us. Her father shook. His head. I won't make it past the border. I've burned too many bridges, but you're still trusted. He looked at her. Don't waste that trust. Naomi wanted to hug him. Wanted to scream. Instead, she said, I'll come. Back. No, he said gently. You'll go forward. They left him in the desert. Denver was colder than Naomi remembered. The wind came sharp between the buildings like something weaponized. The safe house her father mentioned sat behind a mechanic shop owned by a war veteran with one arm and too many stories. The man didn't ask who they were. He just nodded when Naomi said her father's name and led them to the back. A basement. A vault, and inside a room full of boxes stacked too. The ceiling, stamped with numbers and names that had never seen daylight. Naomi stood frozen. It was more than she imagined. Elijah slowly opened a box near the top. Inside were VHS tapes. Paper records, medical files, birth certificates altered. This is proof, he said. Naomi nodded, but her face was pale. This is ammunition, and whoever these records belong to, they've been erased. They spent 4 days in that basement, cataloging, scanning, cross-referencing. They found the name of a girl. Naomi remembered from Glenfield, Jada Wren. Jada had disappeared one night after screaming too loudly in therapy. Everyone was told. She'd been reassigned. The file said otherwise. Subject transferred to Site 11. Location redacted. Naomi dug deeper. Found an address in Nebraska. Not a facility. A private estate. Owned by an Orpheum board member. She stared at it. Her fingers shook. They trafficked her. Elijah didn't speak. He didn't have to. It was the confirmation they both dreaded. But what haunted Naomi most was Clarissa's name. It appeared 5 times, each tied to a different facility's media partnership. One document was damning, a memo between a former Orpheum executive and a journalist at a DC paper, detailing how Clarissa was given access to certain safe survivors to shape the public narrative, not to protect them, to control the damage. Naomi wanted to scream. Instead, she walked out into the snow. Elijah followed. If this is true, what do we do? Naomi's breath came in clouds. We confront her, but not in secret. Not in private. We expose it all. He paused. You? Sure? She looked at him. No, but we promised them the truth, even when it hurts. They flew to DC. Didn't book a hotel. Didn't rest. Naomi requested a meeting with Clarissa. Claimed she had another story to share bigger than Glenfield. Clarissa accepted. Her studio was glass and marble and confidence. Naomi walked in with a flash drive in one pocket and a hidden recorder in the other. Elijah waited outside with a duplicate. Clarissa smiled. I've missed you, Naomi. You've been quiet. Naomi sat. I've been watching. Clarissa leaned forward. What do you have? Naomi placed the drive on the table. Records. Names, kids who were sold, lead to, buried in the system. Clarissa didn't flinch. That's why I gave you the platform, Naomi, to bring this to light. Is that why? Naomi asked. Or was it to control the story before it got too close to you? For the first time, Clarissa's eyes narrowed. Be careful, Naomi. Naomi's voice was steady. I have files. Showing your name, your deals, the kids you chose not to see. Clarissa stood. That's not proof. That's speculation. Naomi stood too. You can explain it. In front of the cameras, tonight, live. Clarissa laughed sharp, amused. You don't have that kind of power. Naomi smiled. I don't need it. The truth speaks louder. The interview aired 2 hours later. Not Clarissa's, Naomi's. With Horace, on an independent channel already buzzing with Redline survivors. She showed the files. The memo. She didn't accuse, she read. And let the silence fill the space. Clarissa once controlled. It went viral. Clarissa released a statement, vague, lawyered, cold, public trust splintered. Other journalists came forward. Leaked emails, side deals, the image shattered. And in the rubble, something strange happened. People started listening to the ones who never had microphones before. Naomi returned to Denver a week later. Her father was gone. The trailer was empty. Just a note on the cot. You did good, kid. Don't look back. She sat in the safe house, exhausted, hollowed. Elijah brought her tea. Rusty lay at her feet. What now? He asked. Naomi looked at him, at the snow falling again outside. Now we rebuild. For the ones still waiting. For the ones we couldn't save. Elijah touched her cheek. And for us? She leaned into his touch. We survived the fire. We deserve the warmth. And for the first time in years, Naomi allowed herself to believe in something not born from pain. She believed in healing. In holding. In love, not as rescue, but as return. Had thought the worst was behind them. that the flames had burned through every lie, that the snow had cooled every scar. But justice, Naomi was learning, had its own seasons. And this season didn't feel like spring. It felt like something colder, slower, hungrier. The kind of winter that came after the fires were out and the cameras turned away. The kind that asked, "What now?" It had been nearly 4 months since Naomi exposed Clarissa. 4 months since the Redline files went public. Since survivors had marched down Pennsylvania Avenue holding signs with their own baby pictures. Since Congress had opened hearings with real witnesses. Since the president himself had used the word reparations on live TV, change was moving. But slowly, painfully, like thawing limbs. Naomi had spent the last months building the coalition. What started as 3 volunteers working out of a garage in Denver had become a national network of caseworkers, digital archivists, civil rights lawyers, and trauma therapists. Survivors came not only from Glenfield and McAllister, but from facilities. Naomi had never heard of places in backwoods Louisiana, in shuttered corners of Detroit, in forgotten hills of Appalachia. It was bigger than she'd imagined, older, deeper. But something was wrong. Files started disappearing from the archive. At first, Naomi thought it was a glitch. But it wasn't. They weren't being deleted. They were being replaced, redacted, whitewashed. Someone had access. Someone from the inside. Elijah traced the breach to an IP in Fairfax, Virginia. Government server, encrypted, and attached to a name Naomi hadn't seen in years. Case officer, Jordan Laird. He had been the man who signed Naomi's transfer from Glenfield in 2008. The man who sat in the corner of the intake room and asked her to spell her own name 5 times before deciding she was non-compliant. The man who had disappeared after a congressional audit. The man her father had once marked in his notes as the broker. No one had seen him since 2010, and yet 2 days later, Naomi received a call from an unlisted number. No caller ID. No trace, just a voice. "If you want the rest of the truth, meet me in person. Come alone." She didn't. She brought Elijah, waiting 3 blocks away, armed with a camera and a silent panic switch. The meeting was in a train station, underground. Empty. And at 4:02 p.m., he walked in. Jordan Laird, older, thinner, but unmistakable. He wore a gray coat. His hands were bare, his eyes unblinking. "I was wondering when you'd find me," he said. Naomi's voice was steady. "You tried to erase my file." "Not erase," he said. "Correct," she laughed. "You called me non-compliant. Then tried to bury me. Why talk now?" Jordan looked past her, into the tunnel. "Because the system you're fighting doesn't care about me anymore. I'm just another outdated handler. But I know where the bodies are. Literally." Naomi's heart pounded. "Then speak." Jordan pulled out a photo. A grainy black and white image of a concrete structure half buried in what looked like a canyon. "Site 0, he said. "Where it started. Before Glenfield. Before McAllister." Naomi stared at it. "What is it?" "Not what," he said. "Who? The children who were never meant to return." Jordan didn't give her much. Just the photo, the coordinates, and a warning. "Once you cross into Site 0, you don't come back the same. If you come back at all." Naomi didn't flinch. "I've never been the same since Glenfield." He looked at her, something almost like guilt flickering behind his calm mask. "You were never supposed to be the one who remembered. They left that night. Elijah drove." Naomi sat silently, eyes fixed on the road, but her mind was elsewhere. She kept touching the photo folding, unfolding, tracing the edges. "Do you believe him?" Elijah asked. Naomi didn't answer right away. "I believe Site 0 exists. I don't believe in closure anymore." The road turned to gravel, then to dust, then to nothing. They hiked the last 4 miles on foot. No trails, no signs. only the desert swallowing them whole. And then suddenly, a clearing, a dip in the earth. And there it was. Site 0. It wasn't what they expected. No fences, no guards. Just concrete, cracked and sun-bleached. A dome, partially buried, with a single steel door and a keypad blinking red. Elijah looked at Naomi. "We can still walk away." Naomi shook her head. "They never gave us that choice. Why should we give it to them now?" She typed in a date. Her birthday. The door clicked. Inside was silence. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that thickens the air and makes your lungs tighten. It smelled of rust and chemicals. The corridor curved downward. Lights flickered weakly above. They passed rooms. Locked. Others open, empty, except for restraints. Notes scribbled in chalk. One wall read, "We were here." We waited. No one came. Then the first body, a girl. No older than 10, curled in the corner. Long gone. Dried tears on her cheeks. Naomi covered her mouth. Elijah knelt. "She's been here for years." They kept moving. More rooms. More silence. And then movement. A figure, thin, alive. It was a boy, maybe 17. He flinched when the light hit him. His skin was pale from darkness. His voice cracked. "Are you real?" Naomi stepped forward. "Yes, what's your name?" He blinked. "They took it. I gave myself a new one." "What is it?" "Number 9. There were more. 4 in total. Children abandoned, isolated, forgotten. All of them born inside the walls. Naomi's stomach turned. "Why didn't anyone look for you?" Number 9 shook his head. "They said we were broken, that we weren't ready for outside." Elijah whispered, "They raised them here, like livestock. They stayed 2 nights. Fed the children. Recorded testimony. Mapped every room." By day 3, Naomi had enough to expose another circle of horror. But before they left, Number 9 gave her a box. "He left this for you," he said. "The man who visited. He called you his daughter." Naomi's fingers trembled. Inside the box was a journal. Her father's handwriting. Pages of dates, names, maps, and at the end, "I couldn't save them all. But maybe you can." When they emerged from Site 0, the sky was brighter. Elijah called Rains, told her everything. The coalition prepared a press conference. But the moment Naomi stepped onto public land, a black van pulled up. FBI. They said it was for her safety. Said they had intel about a threat. Said she needed to come quietly. She didn't single quotes T. Naomi ran. Elijah stayed behind, bought her time. She disappeared into the crowd, into the noise, into the one place the system couldn't follow people's stories. Naomi never planned to vanish. But some truths are too heavy to carry in daylight. She spent the first 48 hours underground, in safe houses she didn't know existed until now, abandoned bookstores, back rooms of tattoo parlors, even an old women's shelter where no one asked questions, only offered warmth and quiet. The files from Site 0 burned in her backpack like live coals. Every time she thought about the children inside, about Number 9 handing her that box, she felt something tighten in her chest. Grief and fury had begun to mix into something new. Resolve. Elijah was missing. No arrest, no headline, no trace. The last she saw of him was his body blocking the van, his mouth yelling her name while agents grabbed his arms. He didn't scream. He didn't run. He gave her time. And now she owed him everything. Her photo was everywhere. News reports called her the missing whistleblower, the activist turned fugitive, the voice of Redline gone silent. Some stations claimed she'd gone rogue. Others hinted she'd been kidnapped. A few, those still loyal to Clarissa's old empire, painted her as unstable, dangerous, delusional. Naomi watched it all in a motel room with curtains drawn and her heart beating like a second clock in her throat. Rusty lay beside her, eyes never leaving the door. He hadn't eaten much since Elijah disappeared. On the 5th night, she received a burner text from an encrypted number. They have him. He's alive. He won't be for long. Naomi's hands shook. The message was unsigned. But she knew who it was from Laird. There were only 3 people alive who knew the exact location of Site Zero. Laird was one of them. The others were buried, either by time or by choice. He'd made his move. And now she had to make hers. She left the motel at 3 a.m. She left Rusty behind with the woman at the front desk, a black grandmother with eyes like stone and a shotgun behind the register. Naomi handed her an envelope. If I don't come back, give this to the press. The woman nodded, didn't ask. Some women didn't need explanations. They just recognized fire in another woman's eyes. Naomi wore no disguise, no wig, no fake glasses. She walked into the federal building in downtown Denver like she belonged there, like she was a part of something bigger than fear. The guards didn't even stop her. The photo of her face was on their bulletin board, but none of them looked close enough. Or maybe they did, and they chose silence. She took the elevator to sublevel 3, pressed the code Laird once used. When the door opened, he was waiting. No guards. No restraints. Just a man in a gray suit and a coffee cup with his initials in gold. You really came, he said. Naomi stared at him. Where is he? Laird smiled. Safe, for now. She took a step forward. You'll release him. Or I'll burn this whole place down. He nodded, slowly. I don't doubt you, Naomi. That's why I asked you here. I don't want to stop you. I want to offer you a stage. She blinked. A what? Laird gestured toward a table. On it lay a folder, stamped with the seal of the Department of Defense. Do you know what happens when a movement grows too large, too fast? He asked. The government doesn't kill it. They absorb it, institutionalize it, put it in a box they can control. Naomi crossed her arms. I'm not here to be absorbed. But you are here, he said. Because you know the next step. If you go public with the Site Zero files, people will riot, cities will burn, children will be pulled from their homes, and the system will reset stronger than ever. It always does. She said nothing. He pushed the folder toward her. You want justice? Real justice? You need the people who make laws to be on your side. You need their money, their protection, their approval. And they only give those things to one kind of person. She stared at him. You. He smiled again. They want to make you the director of a new federal agency. Funded, respected, built to replace the old facilities. With you as its face. Naomi's jaw tightened. You're offering me control over the same machine that destroyed us. I'm offering you the chance to rewire it. She shook her head. And Elijah? Laird stood, walked to the door. He's in a van outside, drugged, unharmed. He'll wake up in 2 hours. You can leave together. Live quietly. Never fight again. Naomi stepped back. You're giving me 2 doors, she said. One where I become their puppet. One where I vanish. No, Laird said. I'm giving you 3. The third is the hardest. You go public. Expose Site Zero, name names. Burn it all, and watch the country tear itself apart. With you in the center. She stared at him for a long time. Then she picked up the folder, read every word, closed it, and walked out. She didn't speak for the rest of the day. She didn't need to. Elijah woke up in a motel near the Colorado border, confused, head pounding, Rusty licking his face. The old woman from the front desk sat nearby, watching him with a shotgun across her lap. She said you'd be back, the woman muttered. Didn't say how. He sat up. Where is she? The woman handed him a note. It was just 4 words. Turn. On Channel 9. It was 8:57 p.m. The screen flickered. A live press conference. The U.S. Capitol. Floodlights. Crowds dot and dash Naomi dot no blazer. No makeup, no PR team dot, just her voice. My name is Naomi Winters. I was born into silence, raised in shadows. Trained to disappear. But I remember, and I'm not the only one. Gasps rippled through the audience. I am not here to accept a position. I am not here to make you comfortable. I am here to tell the truth. She opened the folder Laird had given her. Held it up. This is what they offered me. Power, a seat at the table. If I agreed to forget. She dropped the folder to the ground. I will not forget. She raised a second folder, her father's. These are the names of children buried beneath concrete and contracts. These are the blueprints of trauma paid for by your tax dollars. Security shifted behind her. The air tightened. If you want to arrest me, do it now. But you will have to drag me away while the world watches. Silence. Then dash applause. First from one corner, then another, then the whole. Lawn. Thunder. Not from the sky. From people. From voices. From survivors standing with signs, holding pictures, lifting up names. From Elijah, watching from miles away, whispering. She did it. From Rusty, resting his head on Elijah's chest, finally calmed. From Jordan Laird, sitting alone in a silent room, knowing he had just lost control of the narrative forever. Naomi stood taller. I am not ice. I am fire. I am not what they buried. I am what they tried to kill and failed. She walked off the podium, cameras followed, lights burned, and still, she did not flinch. Because the world now knew her name. And the girl who once woke up under ice? She had melted it all. The wind in D.C. felt different now. Not softer. Not warmer. Just clearer. Naomi stood on the rooftop of the hotel where the coalition had set up temporary headquarters. From up here, she could see the ripple of light stretching out like a constellation stitched across the city. Every bulb below her, now lit by someone who knew her name, or whispered it to their children. For once, being known didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a bridge. It had been 3 weeks since the broadcast. In that time, Elijah had been cleared of all charges. The Department of Justice, under pressure from 23 human rights organizations and nearly 1 million petitioners, had launched a full federal investigation into Redline, Site Zero, and every shadowed facility connected to Orpheum Industries. Clarissa Hadley had gone silent. Her newsroom folded within days. Investors pulled out. Apologies came, but they were too late. Naomi no longer needed them. She had become something bigger than apology. At the core of the storm, Naomi had learned to find stillness. She still slept light, still flinched at the sound of car doors slamming, but she also laughed more now, softly, like someone remembering a language she once forgot. She and Elijah moved into a modest brownstone not far from the Capitol. Nothing fancy, just space and windows. And silence that didn't sting. Rusty had his own corner by the fireplace. Elijah had the upstairs, where he was working on a book. Naomi took the ground floor, where survivors came and went, where young activists held meetings over too much coffee, and where teenagers, some from Glenfield, some from places even she hadn't known existed, sat and told their truths out loud for the first time. It wasn't easy. One girl, 14, had spent 6 years in a facility in Utah, where she wasn't allowed to speak unless reciting Bible verses. Another boy, just turned 16, had been told his stutter was a sign of demonic possession. Naomi didn't flinch when they spoke. She just listened. Sometimes that's all they needed. To be heard, to be real. They called her Icebreaker. It wasn't a name she chose, but she accepted it, because she had, in fact, shattered something. Not just the silence, but the structure. The way people looked the other way. The way victims were taught to apologize for surviving. That was melting now, slowly, like glaciers, like wounds. Like her own heart. On the 1-year anniversary of the broadcast, the Capitol steps looked nothing like they had a year ago. Instead of riot gear and megaphones, there were quilts. Hand-sewn, draped over the rails. Each square was a story, a name, a drawing. A scar turned into fabric. Naomi stood at the top, flanked not by politicians, but by children, real children, survivors. Some couldn't speak, some couldn't stop. They didn't need a script. Naomi didn't bring one, she simply spoke. You don't heal from something like this by pretending it never happened. You heal by remembering out loud, in the open. So others don't have to go through it in the dark. The crowd was silent. No phones, no flashes. Just silence that meant respect. Later that night, Elijah cooked, burnt the onions. Again, Naomi didn't care. She stood barefoot in the kitchen, arms around his waist, forehead against his shoulder. We survived, she whispered. Elijah nodded. No, he said softly, we lived. They danced without music. Rusty barked at their feet, and for the first time in a very long time Naomi laughed. Not the cautious kind, not the polite kind, but the kind that came from somewhere deeper, somewhere that remembered how to feel joy. The next morning, she woke before dawn, slipped outside before Elijah stirred, walked to the river. She took her father's journal, and she let it go. Page by page. Into the water. Not to forget him, but to free him. He had done what he could. Now, it was her turn. And as the pages floated away, she didn't cry. She smiled, because for the first time in her life, Naomi Winters wasn't waking up under ice. She was waking up under sky. Naomi wasn't a hero. She was a girl they tried to bury, and she grew roots in the cold. Her voice became a bridge. Her pain became a map. And in the end, she didn't just survive. She taught us how to live. If this story moved you, share it. And if you want to hear more voices like Naomi's, hit that subscribe button. Because silence has ruled for too long. And we are just getting started.